I was watching a DVD last week, and there was a scene where a doctor was doing a routine exam of a woman in her 80s, and he was checking for her cognitive function. So the doctor came into the room with her, and he said, "Do you know my name?" And she got that answer right. And then he moved around the side, and he said, "Can you tell me what time it is?" Because being able to read a clock is one of the cues, right? And she said, "Well, I could until you came and stood between me and the clock." Well, he shuffled over. And then he said to her, "What year did the Second World War start?" And she said, 1919. And her son looked a little happy because he was the one who wanted it guaranteed that she couldn't look after her own affairs anymore. And the doctor looked kind of sad. But then the patient continued to speak, and she said, "The Second World War started in 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles, when the reparations forced on Germany by the victorious nations inevitably led to the conflict that erupted in 1939. Anyway, skip ahead to the end of what happened was she was dehydrated, and it was affecting her mental function, and she got enough to drink, and everything was fine after that. Well, enough water to drink. Yeah. Most of us, we have enough to drink. It's not so great, right? There is some truth in that, right? Some historians will tell you that the Second World War, really that there was only one World War, that there weren't two World Wars, that one ended in 1919, but it didn't really end. It was just kind of a long intermission before the hostilities really started again in 1939. Depends which historian you ask, right? But one thing all historians will agree on is this, that the history of human civilization is a history of war. I looked on a history website this week, and it listed the battles and wars. It started in 1274 BC with the Battle of Kadesh, and the list went on right down to the present day. I could have shown it up on the screen for you and scrolled it, but we're live streaming today, and I didn't know about the copyright issues, but you can just take it from me. When it comes to the history of war, there are hardly any gaps. There are hardly any gaps. Right through human history, we have been making war with one another, somewhere on this planet, virtually without interruption, and many times there were overlaps between various wars going on, fought simultaneously in different places. So how then are you supposed to hear this promise from Isaiah, which says, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks"? How are you supposed to hear a promise of peace in the midst of ceaseless war? Isaiah said, "Nations will not take up sword against nation, nor shall they train for war anymore." Isaiah made that promise 2,700 years ago, and I think we'd have to agree that it hasn't quite come to pass yet, has it? In fact, what has happened with war is that humankind has got ever more efficient at slaughtering one another, ever more efficient at turning pruning hooks into ever deadlier weapons. Humanity has made great strides at turning plowshares, food-producing, life-giving agricultural implements, turning them into swords that will kill more people more quickly. So what do you make of this promise of Isaiah's then, such a long, long time in coming? What is it that will bring, finally, this peaceful and reconciled community? Well, it's all there in that little passage that Paul read for us. The peaceful and reconciled community will come through three things: through God's presence, through God's instruction, and through God's light. So I want to look now at those three in turn. In God's presence, that's what will bring the peaceful and reconciled community. Verse 2 in Isaiah chapter 5 says, "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established." This is a poetic way of saying God's presence will be fully known and fully established. It says the mountain of the Lord's presence will be established. Fancy way of saying God will be here, fully known and fully knowable. completely present in all his fullness, completely established. The verse goes on to say that the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established, the highest of the mountains, exalted among the hills. Now, the people who heard Isaiah deliver this prophecy would have gone, what's he talking about? The mountain of the Lord, the Temple Mount, that's Mount Zion, where Solomon's temple is. That's not on the highest mountain, not topographically. It's a little hill among some other rather bigger hills. But Isaiah said this, that this mountain of the Lord's temple, Mount Zion, will be established. It will be the highest mountain. It will be exalted among the hills. And people who heard Isaiah saying that would have thought to themselves, he really is making a mountain out of a molehill if he thinks that Mount Zion's going to be the highest mountain. I grew up in Hamilton down the road. It's that way, right? Yes. I grew up in Hamilton down the road where half the city is on top of the escarpment and half the city is below. In Hamilton, this rise of land is known as the mountain, as in Lime Ridge Mall is up on the mountain. Visitors to Hamilton who have actual experience of real mountains look at that little rise of land and they're either completely skeptical or they smile generously and think to themselves, the Rockies are mountains, the Cairngorms are mountains, the Ozarks are mountains, the Andes are mountains. That's just a nice little hill. That's not a mountain. And when people heard Isaiah speak, they had that same kind of polite smile or open skepticism, because they knew that in Israel there are real mountains, including the really big important one, Mount Sinai, where the tablets of the sacred law were entrusted to Moses, where the commandments were brought down from the mountain on 2 tablets. People know that Sinai, that's a real mountain. Mount Zion, where the temple is, a biggish hill. Nothing special, nothing important. But Isaiah's prophecy here says that the mountain of the Lord's temple, Mount Zion, will be established as the highest mountain, exalted among the hills. And what Isaiah is claiming here is not about topography. It's not really about the size of the hill. What he's talking about is that Mount Zion is where God's glory dwells. Everybody knew that's where the temple is, where the presence of the Lord is, especially most forcefully in the Holy of Holies, the very innermost part of the temple. The temple is where God's presence is mediated to the people. And so what Isaiah is saying is that when the mountain of the Lord's temple is established, what he's saying is that God's presence will be fully established and fully known and exalted among all. As Christians, we know the shape that God's full and complete presence. We know that in Jesus Christ, God came to us. God's very presence with us. And that presence is still with us, mediated through the Holy Spirit whom Jesus left for the church. This promise of Isaiah's, God's presence fully established, has come to us in Christ Jesus. And that is how it is that the peaceful and peacemaking and reconciled community is able to be established, where swords really can be turned into plowshares and spears really can become pruning hooks. The signs of that new community are already among us, already present with us. In the next line of his prophecy, Isaiah says, and all nations will stream to it. All nations will be drawn to the very presence of God, streaming up to the presence of the Lord. And it means that they travel together. Now, it is not possible for people to be in conflict when together they are streaming up to the presence of God. It is not possible to make war with a foreigner, no matter how foreign she is, if together you are streaming up to the presence of the Lord. The presence of God, that's the first reason Isaiah offers us how it is that Isaiah just knows that someday the wars are going to end and no one will train for war anymore, because the presence of the Lord, acknowledged and received, that presence will create peaceful and reconciled community. The second reason Isaiah gives for why it is that wars will end and that there will be peaceful and reconciled community, the second reason he gives is the instruction of the Lord. In verse 3, he says, "Many peoples will come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths.'" There you have it. There will be peace because we will be taught. There will be peace because we will be instructed. All of us taught how to make peace. I want to tell you about somebody I know who makes peace, who teaches peace. I have a friend who's been fostering kids for decades. And some of the kids who have passed in and then out of her care have come from situations of horrendous conflict. Warfare, really. Children who've grown up in war, where communication means screaming, where problem solving means a smack in the head, where fairness is an unknown commodity, and instead of home being a place of truth and security and love, home is a place of utter neglect and complete uproar and ceaseless terror about the next bad thing that's going to happen. My friend brings those kinds of kids to her home. And she may only have them a short time, but for as long as they're with her, she does her level best to teach these kids something about how to live in peace. Some of it is so basic that we don't even think of it as peacemaking. We just think it's normal. She teaches them to say please. She teaches them to say thank you. She teaches them to wait their turn. She teaches them to share. She teaches them to think about what it's like to be the other person. She teaches these kids to be respectful of other people's belongings and space. She teaches them how to make peace. For these kids, she creates, for as long a time as she has them, little havens of peace and security and kindness in their lives. She makes peace. And given half a chance, God will instruct us how to make peace in our lives. Yeah, we put fancier constructions around it, but at its very simplest terms, isn't peacemaking as basic as sharing and waiting your turn and listening and saying please and thank you and walking in the other person's shoes and being respectful of other people's belongings and customs and national boundaries and trade agreements? Isn't that really what peacemaking is? And don't we all deep down know that we could have this peace, the peace we all long for, the peace we all crave? We could have it if we would enter into peacemaking attitudes and use peacemaking language and enter into peacemaking actions. Every day, opportunity comes to us to listen to the instruction of the Lord and turn swords into plowshares. Every day, we get chances to stop gossip in its tracks by refusing to pass it on. That's peacemaking. Every day, we get opportunities to take the harsh criticism that comes to us and turn it away with kind words. And that is peacemaking. Every day, we get the gift of failing to retaliate. No, not failing. Every day, we get the gift of deciding not to retaliate every time somebody cuts us off in traffic, fails to really stop at the four-way stop, or cuts in line in front of us. What is it about that? You're standing in line and you're like a perfectly normal, nice person, and somebody cuts in line in front of you and you turn into Attila the Hun. You're like that too, right? It's so weird. I think, wait a minute, that's not like me. Every day, opportunities come to us to take swords and turn them into plowshares. Isaiah talks about this day of the peaceful and reconciled community. He says it's coming. And we all know, don't we, that the promise is real. And we can get it when, one, we acknowledge the presence of the Lord. You know, we see that Mount Zion has popped up and it's right here in our own lives. God is with us. When we acknowledge that, we get to peace. And when we submit to the instruction of the Lord and do the things we all know are true anyway, that's the other way that we get to the peaceful and reconciled community. And third and finally, in this passage, we're given another cue about how we can get to a community of reconciliation and peace. And it's by living in God's light. The last little bit of the passage we heard today, Isaiah says, "Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." Walking in the light. That's how we'll get to peace. That's how we'll get to reconciliation. Now, Jesus talked a lot about this, didn't he? About living your life in the full light of day so that everything can be seen. He delivered some very helpful and stern warnings about choosing to live furtively, to live in the dark, hiding in the shadows, skulking around because we're ashamed of ourselves. Jesus is the light of the world, and he invites us to come into that light and to live in that light. Now, we, of course, all of us have our own particular dark areas in our lives. Things that we don't really want to have to explain to other people. We don't want a light shed on. We just like to keep it in the dark. For some of us, it's the darkness of escape. Whether we use drinking or gambling or shopping or endless hours eaten up with television and net surfing, some of us choose the darkness of escape. Many of us choose to live in that place of darkness, out of control, hiding from our lives and the challenges in them. For some of us, the dark areas, the places where we don't want to stop and face up to reality, those dark areas are conflict and broken relationship, the family members we don't speak to, the friends, former friends, when we see the number come up on call display, we don't answer. And I know I'm not the only person who does that. There are lots of dark places, you know. Some of them are really dark places like infidelity, rage, despair, vengeance. And from all of those dark places, Isaiah's voice cries out, "Come, let us walk in the light of the Lord." He's right. Come to the light, because the darkness is no place for someone who is as beloved as you are. You are the beloved of the Lord. In Jesus Christ, God has come to the world for you. And Jesus Christ died for you and rose for you. And in the life and ministry and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, God said to you and to me and to all the world, "Come, walk in my light." The resurrection is God's yes to all the no that the world can throw at us. God said to you and to me, to all of us, "Come, walk in my light. Be a person of peace. Be a people of peace, a people who can beat swords into plowshares and transform weapons of war into instruments of productivity, feeding the world, healing the world. Come, be a community of peace and reconciliation. Walk in my light." Well, this time of year, light's in short supply, right? You wake up and it's dark, like almost seems like instantaneously the day passes. The longest nights, the shortest days. This time of the year, we're so aware of needing and craving the light. And as the Advent candles are lit week by week and we look forward to the coming of the child, the Prince of Peace, as that light gets closer and closer to us and starts to dawn on us, our song changes. Our spirits lighten and our hearts rise as we get closer to the day of light, the coming of the Christ child. A few minutes ago we sang, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. We don't just sing those words, we know what it is to dwell in lonely exile. A lot of the time we feel like we're in exile, that we've been cast into the darkness, where we stumble around with our grief and our fear and our addictions, our sadnesses and our regrets and our pathologies. The whole spirit of Advent rings true for us because we know what it is to be in the dark and to long for the light to come, for the Savior to come. But remember what happens in the next line of that hymn. When we go from mourning and lonely exile here until the Son of God appear, risen with healing in his wings, to quote a line from another carol. In a few minutes, we're going to sing about the appearing of the Son, singing, Joy to the world, the Lord is come. That's the Advent journey, from mourning in lonely exile to deepest, most profound rejoicing. That's the journey of Advent. It's a journey of peace. The peace that is ours when we know God's presence, when we submit to God's instruction, when we walk in his light. The Advent journey, that journey we make every year, is a journey towards the light. So as you prepare your hearts this Advent season, and you got to, take time out from preparing the house and preparing the gifts and preparing for the social events. You got to take time out of all of those things that will try to steal all your time. Take time and prepare your heart. Listen to Isaiah as you prepare your heart and take up this challenging and delightful life of being a peacemaker. If you go to the Penn Center in the next few weeks, I can guarantee you, you will be given ample opportunity to be a peacemaker. Giving somebody the parking spot. Now, they might have a heart attack right there in front of you, do it. But you get an opportunity to beat a sword into a plowshare. If you look at clerks and smile at them, and Marlene works in retail, if you look at clerks and smile at them and say thank you, you'll make somebody's day. This is not hard, my friends. Beating swords into plowshares sounds a lot more difficult than it actually is. So as you prepare your heart this Advent season, at home and at the mall, take up the delightful and challenging gift of being a person of peace. A life that is lived under the authority of the Prince of Peace. A life of transforming swords into plowshares, transforming self-centered lives into self-giving lives, transforming angry insults into kind words, transforming what will I get into what will I give, transforming so that we are the people who live in reconciliation and peace, where we know God's presence, where we heed God's instruction, and where we walk in God's light. That gift is offered to us today. Will we receive? Will we?